I was halfway down my driveway when I saw a tow chain already hooked under my contractor van and the HOA president standing there like she owned the whole cul-de-sac. The driver muttered HOA order, while Linda kept tapping her clipboard like she was tagging abandoned junk instead of the vehicle I feed my family with. "Move aside, sir," he said. "We're taking it." My camera was already recording as she smirked, "Rules are rules." But there was no rule, no vote, no authority, just their made-up power trying to steamroll me at dawn. That's the moment I decided to walk into that meeting myself. At 6:12 in the morning, the only lights that should have been touching my driveway were the pale ones coming over the ridge. Instead, amber hazard strobes pulsed against the side of my contractor van, flashing off the ladder rack and the metal bins like I'd parked a crime scene instead of a work truck. A rollback tow truck idled at the end of the drive diesel, rattling in the cold air. The driver sat behind the wheel, elbows on the steering column, waiting for a signal. And there she was. Linda Mallory, HOA, president, clipboard, tucked against her ribs like she was marshalling a parade instead of trying to take a man's livelihood. I stepped out of the garage, thermos still warm in my hand. Dew clung to the gravel, the whole cul-de-sac quiet except for that diesel hum and the metallic clink of a tow chain sliding across steel. "Morning," I called, voice flat. "Want to tell me why a tow truck is in my driveway?" The driver didn't look thrilled to be the messenger. "HOA order, sir," he said. "I've got a work ticket right here." Linda gave me a bright, brittle smile. "Mr. Cole, we've notified you twice. Commercial vehicles aren't allowed to remain in driveways overnight. We have to maintain community aesthetic standards." I walked to the van, running my hand along the cold metal before I saw it a bright orange paper tucked under the wiper blade. Pine Ridge Shores. HOA notice of tow. The kind of notice meant to scare renters, not people who actually owned their homes. I peeled it off, reading the block print aloud. Scheduled tow, 10:15 a.m. "You're serious with this? We're following procedure," Linda said. "The rules are clear." "Rules?" I held the paper up. "I've read the covenants front to back. Nothing in here says you can tow a man's work truck from his own driveway." "It falls under visual nuisance," she replied smoothly. "The board approved a clarification last month. There's a difference between a rule and something you scribbled into a meeting nobody attends." I tapped the side of my van. "This contractor van is how I pay bills. You don't get to call it trash because you don't like a logo." The driver stepped out, lifting the tow hook. "I'm not trying to cause an issue. But I've got a schedule, sir. If it's tagged, I have to load it." He moved toward the front bumper. "Hold on." I raised my phone, hitting record. "Say it again." He hesitated, then repeated tow order from the HOA. I angled the camera toward the notice. "And here's your proof," I said. The HOA tried towing my contractor van off my private driveway. Linda exhaled sharply. "You don't need to dramatize this. If the board makes an exception for you, everyone else will demand one too." "Yeah," I said. "Maybe they should." She crossed her arms. "We can either proceed quietly, or we can escalate." That word escalate landed heavier than it should have, like she thought the HOA had the power to push people around until they gave up. The tow driver knelt to feed the hook under the frame. I stepped forward and planted my boot on the chain. He froze mid-motion. "Sir." "No," I said calmly. "Nobody's taking this van today." Linda clicked her tongue. "Obstruction isn't going to help your case. Neither is abusing authority," I shot back. "You want to talk aesthetics. Maybe start with those rusted mailboxes on Elm Row before you come after the guy who's actually keeping roofs from leaking around here." A curtain shifted in the house across from mine. Someone watching but not stepping out. People always watched when the HOA got involved. Nobody wanted to be next. Linda tapped her pen against the clipboard. "You received notice." "Yeah." "Sometime between the flyer for the summer BBQ and a coupon for mulch," I said. "Maybe don't hide major rule changes under clip art." Her smile twitched just barely. The driver gave me a sympathetic look. "Sir, they've already opened the job. I'll have to bill the association even if I leave without the truck." "Bill them," I said. "Doesn't change a thing." Linda checked her watch. "We're past 10. You're in non-compliance. I folded the orange notice and slipped it into my back pocket. You think this little piece of paper gives you the right to take what I work with every day? It gives us authority to act on behalf of the community, she replied. Funny, I said, because I'm pretty sure the community isn't standing behind you right now. Her jaw clenched. I looked at the driver. You're not touching it again. He stepped back slowly, hands raised. Ma'am, Linda didn't answer. She stared at me like she couldn't believe I dared push back. The HOA will escalate, she said finally. I took a breath, calm settling in like a switch flipped. So will I. I turned and walked toward the garage past my toolbox and the smell of cold metal and coffee already reaching mentally for the card pinned to the side of my cabinet. I knew exactly who I was calling next. The lunch crowd hadn't rolled in yet, so the bell over the diner door sounded louder than usual when I pushed it open. I walked straight to the counter and slapped the orange HOA notice down hard enough that the napkin holder rattled. Tessa, the waitress, eyed it and let out a low whistle. HOA again. Worse, I said. This time, they tried towing my work van. She shook her head. They're going to run this place into the ground one driveway at a time. Before I could answer, Ray Caldwell slid onto the stool beside me, suit jacket already unbuttoned like he'd jogged from his office. Ray wasn't just my attorney. He'd been through every zoning fight and contractor dispute I'd ever had. He tapped the notice with 2 fingers. Tell me you recorded everything. I pulled out my phone and set it between us. Full video. Audio, too. Ray nodded. Good. Document first, talk later. How many times have I told you enough that it's in my bloodstream? He hit play on the clip of the tow truck in my driveway. The diner's hum blended with the faint sound of chains scraping metal and Linda's prim voice insisting she had authority. A couple of locals at the corner booth leaned in, pretending not to eavesdrop, but doing a terrible job of it. When the clip ended, Ray exhaled through his nose. They tried towing your contractor van off private property. That's unlawful, Ethan. That's what I figured. He motioned for coffee, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, edges flagged with sticky notes. Let's get our footing before they push this any further. I took a sip from the mug Tessa set down. Linda says they passed a clarification last month. Clarification, Ray repeated, flipping pages. Means they scribbled a rule on the back of a meeting agenda and hoped no one noticed. A couple of old-timers at the counter chuckled. Ray pointed at a paragraph with his pen. Here. Covenants restrict street parking for commercial vehicles. Nothing about driveways. And absolutely nothing granting tow authority without a court order. So they made it up. They made it up, he echoed. And they documented their own mistake by putting it in writing. I leaned in. What's the next move? Ray ran down a quick checklist under his breath. Video, evidence, timestamps, notice authenticity, HOA, authority limits. Then he snapped the binder shut. If they keep pushing, he said, I'll freeze their annual HOA budget. I blinked. You can do that, with the right filing. Absolutely. He stirred his coffee. HOA boards hate 2 things, sunlight and audits. You give them both at once, they fold fast. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number, but I didn't need to guess. HOA admin. Tow rescheduled for review. Ray raised an eyebrow. See? They're already nervous. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift anger settling into resolve. They should be. Ray pulled into my driveway just after sunset. By the time I opened the side door to the garage, he was already inside, closing it behind him, that old leather briefcase hanging off his hand. Garage conference room, he said. Best I've got, I answered. I hit the overhead switch. Fluorescent light hummed on over the workbench stacks of lumber and the corkboard of invoices. The orange HOA notice sat dead center on the scarred wood like it had been waiting on him all day. Ray stepped up to it and smiled without much humor. They messed with the wrong contractor. Coffee? I asked. Absolutely. I poured from the dented thermos and slid him a mug. He cleared a space on the bench with the back of his arm, then laid out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, a thin stack of folders, and a yellow legal pad. All right, he said. Let's build the paper trail before they figure out what they stepped in. He flattened the notice with his palm. "This is our first brick," he said, the moment they crossed the line. No doodles, no spilled coffee. "Someday, this sits in front of a judge." "It's been sitting there since 6 this morning," I said. "Hard to miss." Ray opened the bylaws and ran a finger down the index. "We start with what they actually recorded. Then we compare it to whatever nonsense they've been waving around on that clipboard." He read aloud in short bursts, the legal language sounding out of place in a room that smelled like cut pine and machine oil. "No commercial vehicles may be parked on community streets overnight." He tapped the paper with his pen. "Streets, not driveways, not private lots. Streets only." He flipped a few pages. Nothing about tow authority without a court order. Nothing about visual nuisance being grounds for seizure. "They're improvising." "So they're bluffing," I said. "They're bluffing in writing," he corrected. "That's the important part." He slid the bylaws aside and pulled his legal pad closer. "We're going to give them one clean chance to back off. After that, we stop being polite." "Define polite," I said. "Polite is what happens before certified mail." He started to write, saying each line as the pen moved. "To the Board of Directors, Pine Ridge Shores Homeowners Association," he read. "This letter concerns your unlawful attempt to tow my client's registered contractor van from his private driveway pursuant to a rule not authorized by the recorded covenants." He underlined unlawful. I leaned on the bench. "You think they'll stick with their story after that? They'll stick with whatever protects their ego," he said. "But they'll notice the word unlawful." He kept going. "Please be advised that any further attempt to interfere with my client's use of his work vehicle or any attempt to levy fines based on non-existent authority will be met with immediate legal action." He paused, looked up at me. "Now we twist the knife." He bent his head and wrote slower. "Failing compliance," he continued, "my client's attorney will move to freeze your annual HOA budget pending a full financial and governance review by the court." I let out a low whistle. "You're really going straight to that?" "That sentence," Ray said, "is the part they're going to read 3 times. Board members will argue for hours about mailbox colors. You threaten their annual HOA budget, suddenly everyone finds the rule book." I glanced at the corkboard lined with years of invoices and receipts. Freezing the budget. What does that actually mean for them? He didn't look up. No checks go out. No landscaping crews. No gate repairs. No summer party at the clubhouse. They keep pushing, and a judge can treat their budget like it's on ice until this gets sorted. So the people trying to drag my van off my driveway end up explaining line items to a judge. Exactly. He finished the paragraph, ripped the page from the pad, and smoothed it flat. "Read it," he said, out loud. I did. My voice sounded stiff at first, but by the time I hit the line about freezing their annual HOA budget, it felt less like a complaint and more like a warning. At the end, Ray said, "You're not just some contractor with a camera. You're a homeowner with council covenants and evidence." He slid the notice and a printed screenshot from the tow video into a manila envelope and labeled the front in block letters, "Cole Vita Pine Ridge Shores, HOA. Initial demand." "How fast do you think they'll answer?" I asked. "Depends how fast Linda realizes she's not the sheriff of a cul-de-sac," he said. "We'll email this tonight. Certified copy goes out tomorrow. They'll either fold or they'll dig in. We both know which way they lean," I said. My phone buzzed on the workbench before he could answer. The screen lit up with a new email. "Speak of the devil," I muttered. The subject line read, "Pine Ridge Shores, HOA. Board Review Notice." I opened it and scanned the first few lines. Here we go. "Dear Mr. Cole, the board will convene a formal review of your continued non-compliance and the presence of your commercial vehicle. Attendance requested. Potential sanctions." Ray held out his hand. "Let me see." I passed him the phone. He read it once slowly enough that I could see his jaw tighten, then handed it back with a short nod. "They're doubling down," he said. "Exactly what we need." The HOA clubhouse had never been this full. Every folding chair was taken extra ones lined up along the walls. People stood in the back, leaning against the wood-paneled trim arms crossed. clipboards everywhere on laps and hands stacked on the long table where the HOA board sat like they were holding court instead of running a neighborhood. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A projector hummed on a rolling cart, its blue standby screen washing the front wall in color. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Ray and I took 2 seats near the middle aisle. He set his briefcase at his feet and leaned over. "Remember," he murmured, "you're not here to shout. You're here to show." "Got it," I said. "Show, not shout." Up front, Linda adjusted her little wooden nameplate, "Linda Mallory, President," then tapped the microphone twice. "All right, everyone, let's come to order. This is the quarterly Pine Ridge Shores HOA meeting." The murmurs settled into a low rustle. Papers shifted. Someone coughed. I let my eyes drift down the board table, Secretary, Vice President, Architectural Chair. When I got to the treasurer Mark, he was wiping his palm on the side of his khakis like he couldn't get them dry. A sheen of sweat glistened at his hairline even though the air conditioning vent above him rattled cold air. Ray followed my gaze. "You see that?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said quietly. "He looks like the books are louder than the projector." They rattled through minutes and landscaping updates, the usual theater. A couple of people asked about pool hours and potluck dates. Linda handled it all with that polished patient tone she saved for audiences. Then she flipped to a new agenda page. The smile tightened. "Next item," she said. "Vehicle compliance and community standards." The room shifted. People sat up straighter. A few heads turned toward me. "There have been ongoing issues," she continued, "with certain residents disregarding our rules about commercial vehicles in view. To preserve property values and neighborhood appearance, the board has had to take action." I raised my hand. "Mr. Cole," she said. Eyes cool. "We'll open the floor after the board's presentation." Ray's hand closed briefly around my arm, steady, not stopping. "Let her go first," he murmured. "They'll dig their own hole." The projector clicked screen, replacing blue with a slide labeled Vehicle Enforcement. A blurry photo of my contractor van filled the wall, the HOA notice glowing on the windshield. Linda gestured toward it with her pen. "This is an example of a vehicle that does not comply with the community aesthetic guidelines we adopted last month." Murmurs rose. Someone in the back said, "That's Ethan's truck." "That's my truck," I called out, "and my driveway." Linda ignored the comment. "Our volunteers have spent countless hours monitoring, documenting, and issuing citations. In one case, we even had to schedule a tow. That was my cue." I stood. "Yeah," I said, voice carrying farther than I expected. "You scheduled it at 6 in the morning. In my driveway. On private property." Every head turned now. The room felt smaller. Linda's jaw tightened. "Mr. Cole, you'll have your chance to." Ray stood up beside me, slow and deliberate, suit sharp under the fluorescent buzz. "With respect, Madam President," he said, voice calm but firm. "He has the floor as the homeowner whose property you attempted to seize." A couple of residents clapped, then stopped surprised at themselves. Linda exhaled. "Fine. 2 minutes." I held up my phone. "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a licensed contractor. This van I pointed at the photo is how I feed my family. Last week, the HOA tried towing my contractor van off my private driveway based on a rule that does not exist in the recorded covenants." I tapped the phone screen and started the video. The sound of the tow truck engine filled the room, echoing weirdly off the drop ceiling. People watched the projected image of Linda at the foot of my drive, clipboard in hand, the tow driver saying, "HOA order." Gasps and low curses threaded through the crowd. "That's not legal," someone muttered. "Is that even allowed?" another voice asked. I paused the clip on the frame where my boot was blocking the tow chain. "This," I said, "is where I had to physically stand between their mistake and my livelihood. On my own land." Linda grabbed the microphone. "You're mischaracterizing a standard enforcement action." The board. Ray stepped closer to the center aisle. "No, he's not." His voice cut through the room like someone had turned the volume up. "I'm Ray Caldwell," he said, "attorney for Mr. Cole. What you just watched is an HOA attempting to enforce a non-existent rule by ordering a tow truck onto private property without court authority. That is not standard enforcement. That is overreach. Mark, the treasurer, dabbed his forehead with a napkin, now eyes flicking down to the ledger in front of him. The numbers on those pages suddenly looked combustible. Ray held up a packet, the same demand letter he'd written at my workbench. We've already notified this board in writing. He continued that if this behavior continues, if you issue one more bogus notice, one more unlawful threat, we will seek court intervention. A woman near the back spoke up. So, what does that mean for us? For our dues. Ray turned slightly toward her, but his eyes stayed on the board. It means, he said, that the next step on our side is simple. My client's attorney, he touched his own chest lightly, will move to freeze your annual HOA budget until a judge reviews how you're exercising authority. The word freeze seemed to land on that board table like a brick. Mark's face went a shade paler. The secretary looked down at her notes as if they might tell a different story. Linda's fingers tightened around the wooden gavel in front of her. You can't threaten the board with, she started. This isn't a threat, Ray said evenly. It's a remedy. You opened the doors when you turned a homeowner's driveway into your personal test case. The room erupted, voices overlapping, residents talking to each other now instead of just listening to the board. Words like dues, lawsuit, tow truck, overreach floated above the general noise. I watched it wash over Linda. For the first time, her confident mask slipped just a fraction. She grabbed the microphone like she was hanging on to the last piece of control. This meeting, she said, raising her voice above the noise, is now adjourned pending legal review. She brought the gavel down hard on the table. The crack echoed against the walls, sharp as the projector's click when the screen went black. People didn't move right away. They just kept talking louder now as the board gathered their papers with stiff, jerky motions. Ray leaned toward me, voice low enough for only me to hear. Congratulations, he said. They just made this official. The Pine County courtroom always felt colder than it looked. Hardwood benches, worn smooth by decades of jury duty and traffic tickets, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the faint smell of coffee and old paper. When we walked in, it wasn't crowded, just a scattering of residents in work boots and windbreakers, a couple of suits from the county, and the HOA's attorney at the far table. Ray set his briefcase on our table like he was setting down a brick of quiet explosives. Calm. Controlled, loaded. He straightened his tie, then leaned toward me. If they abused funds, this freeze will sting, he said under his breath. Boards like this care more about money than rules. I nodded, palms flat on my pants to hide the sweat. My contractor van sat legally on my own driveway, but somehow I was the one in court. The bailiff called all rise. We stood as the judge entered. Gray hair, square shoulders, expression carved in stone. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the docket. Next matter, Sterling v. Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Motion to freeze annual HOA budget, pending review. His voice carried easily in the quiet room. Ray stood. Good morning, Your Honor. Ray Caldwell for the plaintiff, Mr. Ethan Sterling. The HOA attorney rose from the other table. Good morning, Your Honor. Charles Dean for Pine Ridge HOA. The judge nodded once. I've read the motion and the written responses. Counselor Caldwell, you may proceed with your argument. Ray stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on the lectern. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Your Honor, this is about an HOA that tried to become law enforcement without authority, he said. My client's contractor van was parked on his private driveway. The HOA attempted to have it towed, not from a common area, not for safety, simply because they didn't like how it looked. He lifted a paper from his folder and held it up. This is the violation notice they taped to his windshield. There is no covenant language to support it. There is no board-approved policy authorizing towing from private property. And yet, they hired a tow truck and ordered it to remove his livelihood from his own driveway. The judge held out a hand. Ray walked the document up. The judge read silently. The only sound in the room was the faint tap, tap, tap of his pen against the bench. Counselor Dean, the judge said without looking up. Is there any recorded covenant specifically permitting this HOA to tow vehicles from private driveways? Dean shifted on his feet. Your Honor, the association has broad authority to enforce community aesthetics, and that's not what I asked. The judge cut in. Is there a specific towing authority recorded? Dean's Adam's apple bobbed. Not explicitly. Your Honor, but past practice. So, no, the judge said. Go on, Mr. Caldwell. Ray picked up without missing a beat. In addition, Your Honor, the HOA has used association funds to pursue this unlawful enforcement. They hired a tow company. They've engaged counsel to defend an action that violates their own bylaws. They've spent community money on what amounts to harassment of one of their own residents. He flipped open a binder. Tab 3 is the financial summary obtained in discovery. Line items show legal expenditures tied directly to this enforcement action without membership approval. I watched the judge as he read. The pen tapped again, slow and steady. Every tap felt like a nail being set. Our motion, Ray continued, is simple. Freeze their annual HOA budget temporarily. No new spending beyond essential maintenance and existing contracts. No new enforcement costs. No discretionary spending. This protects other residents from footing the bill for illegal overreach until the court can fully review their conduct. The judge looked over his glasses at Dean. Response. Dean cleared his throat. Your Honor, this is an extreme remedy. The HOA was merely attempting to maintain community standards. Any errors were procedural, not malicious. Freezing the budget would punish innocent homeowners. Ray waited, hands folded, expression neutral. The judge turned back to him. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any evidence this enforcement was retaliatory or selectively applied? Yes, Your Honor. Ray gestured toward me. We'd like to call Mr. Sterling. My heart picked up speed. I stood, moved to the witness stand, and was sworn in. The Bible under my hand smelled like dust and leather polish. Ray stepped a few paces closer. State your name for the record. Ethan Sterling. Mr. Sterling, what do you do for a living? I'm a contractor. I run a small outfit. That van they tried to tow, that's my work, my tools, my income. And where was that van parked on the morning in question? On my driveway, I said. Fully licensed, insured, and registered. Same place it's been for years. Tell the court what happened that morning. I took a breath and pictured the amber hazard lights, the dew on the gravel. I came out around 6, I said. There was a tow truck at the end of my driveway. Chain laid out. The HOA notice was taped to my windshield. The driver told me he was there on HOA order. I glanced at the judge. I told him they had no right to tow my contractor van off my private driveway. I recorded him saying he was acting on an HOA order. The HOA president, Linda, was there with a clipboard. When I pushed back, she said, "The HOA will escalate." Ray held up a page. "Is this a still from your video?" "Yes." He approached and showed it to the judge. I could see the moment frozen my van, the tow chain, Linda standing there like she owned the street. "In your view, Mr. Sterling," Ray said, "did the HOA have any legitimate safety reason to tow your vehicle?" "No," I said. "They just didn't like how a contractor van looked in their subdivision. They threatened my livelihood to protect aesthetics. And what happened after you retained counsel, the HOA started sending more notices. Then they hired an attorney. I got emails where they called me non-compliant and an eyesore. They spent meeting time and money trying to make an example out of me." Ray nodded. "Thank you. No further questions." Dean approached legal pad in hand. "Mr. Sterling, isn't it true the HOA has asked all residents to keep commercial vehicles out of sight? They sent a preference email once I said. No rule, no vote, no recorded amendment, just a suggestion. But you knew they didn't want the van visible. I also knew they didn't have the right to tow it," I replied. "They tried anyway." Dean's jaw tightened. No further questions. I stepped down the wood of the railing smooth under my hand. The judge leaned back, pen still in his fingers. Tap, tap, tap. He looked from Ray to Dean, then out at the handful of residents sitting behind us. A couple of them were still in work shirts, names stitched over their pockets. Guys who understood exactly what it meant to have someone go after your tools. This matter, the judge said, finally raises serious questions about the association's use of its authority and its members' money. He set the pen down. I'm taking the motion under advisement, he said. I'll issue a written order. Counsel will be notified. The gavel came down once sharp and final. Outside in the hallway, the courthouse felt narrower, the old tile floor amplifying every step. Ray closed his briefcase and exhaled through his nose. So, I asked. He gave a small, tight smile. Be ready, he said. This could go nuclear tomorrow. The bell over the diner door gave a sharp metallic ring, the kind that made every fork pause halfway to every mouth. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Ray. The sound of his shoes on the tile, steady, deliberate, told me this wasn't a social visit. He walked straight toward me, a manila folder tucked under his arm, stamped across the front with a deep blue Pine County Court seal. His expression said everything: focus. Pressure victory being held in place by discipline. He set the folder on the table without sitting down. We got it, he said. Just 3 words, but they hit harder than anything the HOA had thrown at me over the last 2 months. I opened the folder slowly. The paper inside felt heavier than the diner menu, thicker official. The embossed crest glinted under the fluorescent lights. A few regulars craned their necks, pretending to look at the pie display. Across the top, in bold type, big enough to read from 2 tables over, Order of the Court, Pine County Superior Court. My pulse kicked up. I kept reading. Pursuant to motion filed by plaintiff's counsel, the court hereby freezes the association's annual HOA budget pending review of governance and enforcement actions. I exhaled through my nose. Once. Hard. I read it again slowly because documents like this don't happen to contractors from Pine County. They happen in movies, news stories, somewhere else. Not here, not in this diner where the biggest drama used to be whether the early crowd drank all the coffee before 7. Ray slid into the booth across from me, lowering his voice, though half the diner was already listening. It's official as it gets, effective immediately. They can't spend a dime without court approval. I glanced down at the folder again. Inside it, resting against the court order, was the laminated HOA notice, the one they'd taped to my van windshield the morning they tried to tow it. The once creased paper was now flat, clean, glossy, prop number 3 restored like a piece of evidence ready to be displayed under courtroom lights. You laminated it, I said. Ray smirked. Symbolism matters. Besides, if Linda tries to claim the notice didn't exist, this makes sure everyone remembers it exactly as it was. Tessa, wiping down the counter, leaned over. Ray, that a win face you're wearing. A big one, he answered. She nodded toward me. Then, don't keep him in suspense. We all saw him nearly blow a gasket the morning that tow truck showed up. Ray gestured for me to read the order aloud. So I did. By the time I finished, the diner was dead quiet, like Pine County itself was holding its breath. Then a trucker from the corner booth let out a long whistle. "About time somebody put that board in their place," he said. Another man slapped the counter. "Freeze their whole budget. Every last dollar." Ray nodded. "Until the judge decides otherwise." I felt something unwind in my chest. Not relief, more like the weight finally shifted to the right shoulders. I placed the laminated HOA notice next to the order and spoke clearly, letting the words settle. The HOA tried towing my contractor van, and now my attorney froze their annual HOA budget. It wasn't bragging. It was truth laid out in plain English. Finally, someone muttered, someone fought back. And there it was, the value line Ray had told me would hit home. Something about men who've spent their lives fighting their own small battles permits finds bad luck understood victories like this better than anyone. Ray leaned back, shoulders relaxing for the first time since this started. "This is the turning point," he said quietly. A couple of regulars edged closer to the booth. One was a retired electrician named Tom, the other a mechanic whose name I always forgot because everyone just called him Wrench. Tom hooked a thumb toward the folder. "Explain it in plain talk. What does freeze mean exactly?" Ray didn't sugarcoat. "It means the board can't write checks. No discretionary spending. No legal fees, no landscapers, no gate contractor, no summer events. Every penny they spend from this moment forward has to be justified and approved. Wrench barked a laugh. Linda's gonna hate that. Oh, she'll do more than hate it, Ray said. She'll panic. Every board president who thinks they run their own little kingdom does. I traced the judge's signature with my eyes. Strong strokes, no hesitation. It looked like authority. Real authority. The kind the HOA pretended to have. And the residents I asked. They'll be fine, Ray said. This only freezes spending by the board, not community responsibilities. Lights stay on. Trash gets picked up. But if the board wants to spend $1 on anything that smells like retaliation or overreach, nope. Judge just took their teeth. I let out a slow breath. Feels like the balance just flipped. It did, Ray said. And it's all because they pushed too hard. You documented everything. You stayed calm. You didn't give them anything to use against you. Before I could answer, the diner's front door slammed open, the handle smacking the wall with a crack that made Tessa jump. Linda Mallory marched in, the HOA president, in all her clipboard-wielding glory. Her face was flushed, her hair pulled back too tight, and she looked like she'd jogged the whole way from the subdivision. She scanned the diner, once spotted the folder on my table, and zeroed in like a hawk. She pointed the clipboard at me as she stomped toward the booth. We need to talk, immediately. Every coffee cup froze mid-air. Ray didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. He just spoke calmly. Linda, unless you're here to congratulate my client on winning his motion, I'd suggest lowering your voice. She ignored him. You blindsided the board with this filing. I folded the order closed. No, Linda. You blindsided yourselves when you tried to tow a man's work van off his own driveway. Her jaw clenched so hard I could hear her teeth grind. The board is calling an emergency meeting, she said. Tonight. Attendance required. Ray finally looked up, his expression somewhere between patient and amused. Linda, your board can call as many emergency meetings as you want, but until the judge lifts that freeze order, you're out of moves. Her eyes darted to the laminated notice, then to the embossed court seal, then to the faces of the locals watching her. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she looked small. We're not done, she said, voice tight. No, I replied, but we're finally even. She stormed out, door slamming behind her so hard the window rattled. Ray took a slow sip of his coffee. Tomorrow, he said, is going to be interesting. And for the first time in weeks, I almost smiled. The clubhouse parking lot was already overflowing when I pulled in. Pickup trucks and sedans lined the curb all the way down to the stop sign, headlights winking as more neighbors tried to squeeze into the last scraps of gravel. Through the double-glass doors, I could see bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, the low rumble of angry voices seeping through the frame. Ray walked beside me, carrying the same manila folder with the Pine County court seal visible along the edge. Under my arm, I held the laminated HOA violation notice. It felt cool and rigid in my hand, like a badge I never asked for. Inside, the air was thick coffee cologne, old carpet, and nerves. Folding chairs had been set in tight rows, aisles narrowed to the width of a shoe. People lined the back wall, leaned against support beams, crowded near the snack table that no one had bothered to restock. The bulletin board in the corner, usually cluttered with lost dog flyers and piano lesson ads, was bare except for a single sheet announcing tonight's special HOA session in oversized bold. The HOA board sat at the front behind long folding tables pushed together. Linda was in the middle, shoulder's stiff gavel laid in front of her like a prop she wasn't sure she knew how to use anymore. To her right, the treasurer stared down at a stack of papers, his knuckles white on his pen. The secretary tapped a laptop trackpad like she could click her way out of all of this. Ray and I took 2 seats near the center aisle. A couple of neighbors nodded at me, men I'd seen on ladders at the post office behind lawnmowers on hot Saturdays. Their faces were tight expectant. Linda cleared her throat once, then again louder. "This meeting will come to order," she said. Voice shaky at first, then more firm. "This is a reconvened session of the board to address concerns raised by recent legal action." A murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. She lifted a paper from a stack. "We are here to respond to matters relating to an attempted tow of a vehicle and subsequent court proceedings. That vehicle has a name. Somebody called from the back. It's Ethan's work van." A ripple of agreement followed. Linda's jaw flexed. She glanced at Ray, then at me, then at the court order peeking from his folder. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "The board has reviewed guidance from our counsel and the recent order issued by Pine County Superior Court," she said. "We have been advised to make certain acknowledgments on the record." Ray leaned in toward me. "Here it comes," he whispered. Linda took a breath, eyes fixed on the paper so she wouldn't have to meet ours. First, she read the board, acknowledges that authorizing a tow of Mr. Ethan Cole's contractor van from his private driveway without proper notice hearing or clear authority under the recorded covenants was beyond the scope of our powers. The room didn't gasp so much as exhale. People had known it felt it, but hearing it out loud was something else. A few heads turned my way. I stayed quiet. Second, she continued, voice tightening, "We acknowledge that our attempt to enforce alleged aesthetic rules in this manner was improper and not supported by the governing documents." The treasurer shifted uncomfortably. The secretary stopped typing. And third, Linda said, "We acknowledge that as a result of this action and subsequent conduct by the board, the court has issued an order freezing the association's annual HOA budget pending audit and review." A buzz rose sharper this time. Someone whistled under his breath. Another neighbor muttered, "That's what you get." Ray remained still, hands folded, watching like he was tracking evidence in real time. I caught Linda's eye. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked cornered by her own signature, her own decisions. She set the paper down and picked up another sheet, this one printed on letterhead with the HOA logo. "The board has prepared a formal apology," she said. "It will be mailed to all residents, but I've been instructed to read it aloud tonight." Her voice dropped an octave, more measured, less defensive. "On behalf of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she read, "we apologize to Mr. Ethan Cole for authorizing an attempted tow of his contractor van from his private driveway without proper authority, procedure, or respect for his rights as a homeowner." The room went silent. "We further apologize to the community for any distress, division, or financial risk our decisions may have caused. We recognize that the association exists to serve, not to intimidate, and that we have failed to uphold that standard." She lowered the letter halfway, swallowed hard, then finished. "The HOA hereby rescinds the tow order in full and acknowledges that Mr. Cole's vehicle was never in violation of any enforceable rule or covenant." I felt my shoulders finally loosen. Ray gave a small nod. "That's the admission we needed," he murmured. Linda set the letter aside, palms pressing flat on the table to steady herself. Per the court's order, she continued, "The association's annual budget will remain frozen until an independent audit is completed and any governance corrections are approved. During that time, discretionary spending will be limited. We accept this condition." The treasurer looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. From the side of the room, Tom, the retired electrician from the diner, stood up. "So," he said, voice carrying easily, "what about accountability? Are we just supposed to forget all this happened?" A chorus of agreement followed. Linda's eyes flicked toward the back, then at us, then at her own board. The gavel sat untouched. "Our bylaws," she said slowly, "do allow for motions from the floor to call for board reform or new elections, if supported by the membership." A man from the front row turned around, eyes bright. "Then let's do it," he said. "Right now." Hands shot up. People started talking over one another. Someone yelled, "New board." Another added, "One that actually reads the bylaws before they weaponize them." Ray glanced at me. "This is your community," he said softly. "You should be the one to speak." I stood, feeling the laminated notice under my fingers. All the eyes, all the frustration, all the early mornings and late-night emails settled into one tight line down my spine. "Linda," I said, "board members, neighbors." The room quieted. I stepped into the aisle so everyone could see the document in my hand, the same notice they'd taped to my windshield at dawn like a warning tag on junk. "Most of you know how this started," I said. "The HOA tried towing my contractor van off my own driveway. They taped this notice here like I was some problem they needed to clear off the street." I held the laminated notice up the overhead lights reflecting off the plastic. They called it aesthetic enforcement. They called it community standards. But what it really was, abuse of authority. And it wasn't just about me. If they could do it to my van, they could do it to anyone's job, anyone's home. I nodded toward Ray. So I did the only thing I could do that didn't involve yelling or slamming doors. I called my attorney. I documented everything. We followed the law step by step. I let the silence sit for a moment. "And now," I said, voice steady, "that same court that heard our case has done something this board never expected." I flipped the laminated notice over, then gestured toward Ray's folder where the court order rested. HOA tried towing my contractor van, so my attorney froze their annual HOA budget. The words hung there heavy and undeniable. A low murmur of approval rolled through the crowd, then grew. When it settled, I spoke again. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about making sure this place is run by people who understand they work for us, not the other way around. So tonight I'm asking for something simple. Let's vote. Let's reform this board. Let's set rules that are clear, fair, and lawful." Hands went up. Voices called. "Vote," someone shouted. All in favor of new elections, and nearly every arm in the room lifted. The board members exchanged looks. Even the treasurer seemed relieved. Ray watched expression approving, but restrained. That he whispered is what accountability looks like. After a quick, shaky procedure that Linda's own secretary read from the bylaws, the motion passed loudly, decisively. New elections would be scheduled. An independent auditor would review the books. The budget would remain frozen until the court said otherwise. As people filed out, talking, clapping each other on the back, leaning over to shake my hand, I stayed near the front, letting the tide pass around me. Ray closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. "You did good," he said. "You stayed measured. You fought clean." I looked down at the laminated notice one last time. "Feels like the community finally woke up," I said. He nodded. "They did more than wake up. They took ownership." The last of the residents drifted into the parking lot. Linda lingered near the table, eyes on the gavel she hadn't used much that night. When she finally glanced up at me, there was no fire left, just a tired kind of understanding. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The court order and the vote had already spoken for her. Outside, under the dim lot lights, neighbors clustered in small circles trading stories and plans for the next board. The clubhouse door closed behind us with a soft thunk. Ray adjusted his tie and looked over at me. Finally, he said, "Someone fought back. The right way." This time, I didn't just hear the words. I believed them. The crowd was still buzzing when I stepped outside the laminated notice firm in my hand and the court's stamped order posted on the clubhouse wall, catching the afternoon light. In that moment, I realized the hearing wasn't just procedure, it was the ceremony that reset the lines between power and responsibility. We learned that standing your ground with evidence and due process can pull a whole community back into fairness. And when I looked around at the homeowners shaking hands and planning a better board, I knew healing had finally begun. Finally, someone fought back. Share your HOA story below your map might help someone redraw theirs.